Good morning, everybody. We're going to be working on our Unit 7 database assignment today, and I have the document up on the screen here that we're going to be going through. Some of the main focuses in here are working with the alter command, altering tables and adjusting them, adding values and doing things of that nature. Right now I'm kind of waiting for my Microsoft Word seems to be hiccuping here where I'm trying to scroll right now and it's not doing a darn thing. So let's see if it wakes up and responds. I don't know if you guys ever get that happening on your machine, but it seems to happen on my work machine, but never on my personal. This machine always seems to hiccup a little bit. Alright, so it talks here about the fact that in one of the previous units we went through and we created a database called video, and I think that's one of the last ones we did together in the classroom before this pandemic stuff started happening. And we, as a result of that, had a certain structure in place. So what is kind of necessary here as we begin is to make sure that in your SQL Server, once you have that up and running, that you do have the video database and that you do have the tables that you see here. So I don't know if you guys remember going through this process, and at that time we were really just learning how to properly create tables and do it to spec based upon information that was provided by the document that we were working with. We had predetermined the primary keys and what fields were going into each thing. So just make sure that you have that. If for any reason you don't, and I'm pretty sure everybody in this class has this in place already, you would have to backtrack to that assignment and then build that out. Otherwise, none of the stuff in here is going to work, obviously. And so that can be a little problematic. All right. Let's go ahead and start looking at the instructions here. It says you're to complete the following actions in the database that you did in the previous lab. Everything's got to work. Alright, it says use the alter command to alter the tables and add table constraints that are defined in the tables below. And there's a temptation here, and for those of you that have worked with SQL Server Management Studio with any depth will know that you can actually do some of this stuff with the GUI by actually going to a table, choosing its properties, selecting a couple of fields, and just basically enabling the stuff. So in other words, rather than go in there and manually write the code to do the change, you would just do it from the interface. And frankly, the practicality of it is out in the field you might choose to do it that way just because the tools are there. They're just sitting there for you. The reality is sometimes you do want to do this through code for a number of different reasons. The one reason, and you guys should always keep this in mind, is why would you go to the trouble of writing code for SQL database when you can just do it graphically? Well, the one reason is because SQL files can be saved, and then you can go back and you can review what you did. So for example, you have basically an archive of all the stuff that you typed in. And one of the ways I do these assignments, when I put this off on my second screen is, here's all the commands already right there, if you were fast enough to screen capture those. But those kind of serve as a script, at the same time. Not that I would operate them all necessarily in one file like that, but potentially I could. And then if you were, let's say, to take a database and whatever you're doing to this database, you wanted to do it to others, or go through the same type of procedure, you could hypothetically go in there and tweak things, and basically most of your commands are in place already. You can just hit a button and let it run. All right, well, let's talk about what's going on here in this table. This is a table called member, and what they're asking us to do here is to add a constraint for system date, basically. So we need to actually throw that little piece in. So the table's already built. So here's a problem with database work. The table's built, then you realize, uh-oh, I need to do something else to it. And that's where this command comes into play. So let's start out by just getting the commands to work, and then we'll paste them back into the document. So right now I'm just going to build a new query. And let's make sure that we're using video just to be on the safe side. And after we've done it once, we should need to do it again, but just in case. All right, so the first command is going to look a little bit like this. Well, exactly like this, actually. So I'm just pasting the whole thing in. And so we declare which table we're going to do the alteration to. We're going to add the constraint, and we are calling the constraint, we're giving it a name, we're saying system date constraint to match the information that we were given. And then we're going to set a default for it, and what we're going to do here is we're just going to do a get date. And if you read in your readings, or maybe you didn't pick that up, I don't know how deep you read, but that's a built-in function that pulls the current system date and then adds it in for the column join date. So the idea is that you add a new record, and when that record is added, the timestamp goes with it. And that's not an uncommon setting. So let's go ahead and use this one and execute it. All right, so it says it completed successfully. So we're going to take it on faith that it worked. We have no reason not to think that, but can anybody think of a way that we could look at it and verify that it worked? Any recommendations? You guys remember the commands for that? Could we just look at the design of the table? Does that tell us if something... Well, it certainly tells us if there's a primary key, right? It doesn't necessarily indicate that the join date is a constraint by looking at this type of information. And that's where the graphical tools can sometimes be a little bit deceiving, because you don't see that type of thing. If you start digging into some of the details behind it, you can pull some of that information. But for right now, we're just going to take that on faith relatively. But let's move on to the next exercise. Let's paste this in and then move on. Yeah, a question?
Under the tables, there is a thing called constraints, and it did add system date constraint. So is that a way to check?
Yes, and
you just click left.
Yeah, if you're down here looking for it, right?
Actually.
Or did you do it off properties?
The left-hand column, and then if I just do a plus, expand the plus sign for that table, there's a thing that says constraints, and if you extend that, it shows. Yep,
that's the one way, right? Right, just like you can pull up your keys. I'm sorry, your voice is breaking up just a little bit on my end.
It's breaking up on my end too. Sorry.
That's okay. I just want to let you know your questions are being recorded. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, and some of the things, and we don't get to the point where we aren't going to be getting to triggers this semester. However, you can see your indexes, and this chapter isn't necessarily on indexing yet. But you can see that the primary key is a form of index, and that just happens just by virtue of it. The other thing that, constraint isn't exactly like a primary key, but it is a linking mechanism that forces the connections to other tables. All right, let's close that and move on. Actually, we're going to copy and paste this into the document, right? So we're going to copy that, and let's just go ahead and put it right inside here. Now, if you wanted, I do get people that will, frankly, get when they do these documents. I'm trying to see why it is not letting me paste. I'm going to have to open and reinitiate that document. Sorry about that. Did I not hit enable editing? That's what I think that perhaps of course it's asking me to do that. You know, I always ask you to do all the extra steps when you need it the least, it seems. I don't know if you guys ever get that effect. Like when I started Zoom today, it asked me to verify who I was with a text message, and like, oh great, I'm in the basement, I might not get the text message. Now I do get some people that will also take screenshots of like their output windows, and in some cases that's pertinent. In this case I would say probably not pertinent. This is a pretty simple command. Alright, let's move on to the next one. This one gets a little bit more complicated. We're going to do an alter again, but you notice we're going to actually throw in a bunch of different items here that are going to fit in these rating and category sections. So we're going to, you know, obviously the rating system for movies, and then what it fits into in terms of genre. Now, a way to approach that, once again, you're going to use the same command. So let's start by just dropping in the first part of the command. So the first thing I'm going to do is just say this. Which one are we altering? We're altering title. And then I'm going to go on to say add constraint. And I'm going to call it check rating in all caps. Now, was that dictated to us what it should be called? Not necessarily. It wasn't really. So the fact that I'm calling it what it is kind of like my choice. But think about how you like look at a movie, right? Often that might be a consideration, and I guess if you don't have children in the mix, maybe you don't think about it as much. But I know that when ours were young, it was always a consideration. And then by the time they got to be about 10 or 12 or something, they thought they could watch anything, and that wasn't necessarily the case, we discovered. So be careful what movies you let your children watch. But this can actually be accomplished pretty simply. And this is kind of a compound statement I'm going to drop in here. And I want you to take a look at the syntax of this probably more than anything else. We can use this compound statement and throw an and in there. And really what we're going to do here is we're throwing in a check. So the check basically does to make sure that whoever's entering the information into the database picks one of those ratings. And for some reason I think that we're maybe missing, I don't know, PG-13 or something in there, but I mean, if you want, throw it in. There's also, I mean, there's other ratings that aren't listed there either, but I think you get the point. Also with categories, the same thing. I could think of a couple more categories that could be thrown in as well. But those are pretty simple little statements. Probably the trickiest part about it is really getting all the parentheses in the right spot, commas, and single quotes. So that's something that sometimes burns me, but you know, then we have all the IntelliSense here that'll help us out. So let's go ahead and run this one. Alright, and let's see where it is having a problem. It says incorrect syntax near the keyword and, so I spelled and wrong apparently. Let me just check my solution file here and see if I missed something. You guys see anything that I may have missed? Do I have any quotes or anything that pasted in incorrectly? It's kind of nice when you have the solution file sitting right here too, I suppose. Alright, so now the next thing I'm doing is I'm just making sure that all my keywords are right, all the things I typed in are correct.
They just do separate.
Yeah, that's a possibility. That would be one fix for sure. It's I love how the debugger in this program tells you at least it's near here, but it doesn't necessarily say that's it, which I think is kind of amusing. So I'm just looking through these, and one of the things that kind of gets you sometimes are those single quotes, and that's why I'm doing this slight zoom here. Sometimes when you paste those in, they turn to the curly cube kind. If you haven't ever experienced that problem before, let me get rid of the use video statement here at the top and just run it again. All right, well, there you go. I don't know why it would have the problem with that, but that was enough to make it work. So there was nothing wrong with the syntax. Sometimes you just have to try it again. All right, so let's get this pasted into the document. Yeah, they don't have PG-13 in there. We'll have to fix that. All right, the next one has us doing much the same thing. Notice we do have to put in a foreign key reference here for title and title ID, and then we're also going to throw in a check on these 4 possible values. So let's get that one going here. Now let's start with the foreign key part first, and they do give us some of the information. So I'll start by just getting in the initial commands. So pick the table that we're going to work on, and then I'm going to call that foreign key constraint based on the title ID. And then I'm going to go ahead and throw in this next statement here, which actually does the definition of it. So in this case, the foreign key is going to be title ID, which is the same thing that we saw, in the document here, right here. And now, what is it referencing? It's referencing the title relative to that title ID. So it, in other words, pulling in the same information from the other part of the table. Now, in addition, I can run a second command, and some people will run these two separately. All right, but if you're being asked to kind of do it all in one fell swoop, can you do it with one command? Not really. Because these are 2 separate constraints, I like to see something like this, especially if we're doing the check on it, typically in a separate command. So this one, once again, will be similar to what we just did in the previous exercise. So we'll do the check status, and then we'll type in the following command. And I'm just going to paste it in just for sake of speed here. And then once again, like, where do we get status from? That comes from the keyword that's indicated in the example. So that comes from here, so if you're wondering. All right, let's go ahead and try to run these and see what happens. It's really thinking on that one. I don't know if yours is taking quite so long. I wonder if my machine is hiccuping again. I'd say that now that they're saving all this time on office space, or all this money on office space, both they can. All right, so the commands completed successfully. Now you can go in there, of course, and as we were looking at the other alterations, you can always look at those, the constraints in there, and the keys. So you can see that we added that little piece in there. Anybody having any problem with it, or are you just watching at this point? All right, I'll assume you're watching. Let's paste these. I'll paste these into the document. And that's quite all right. I know that this is moving, relatively quickly, and if you were able to type that fast, I would be very impressed. All right. Next thing we're working on is rental, and now you can see that we have a lot of different things going on in this one. So here's where you have to be a little bit careful, and if you're thinking about it in a real logical fashion, what might occur to you, and this is the way that I think of these problems. So you might think of it differently, and I've seen people try to write like one alter statement to do all of it. My strong recommendation is notice that each one of these columns really has alterations, and by my count there's 5 columns with alterations. I would write 5 separate statements to do those commands. So I would take them probably one at a time here in terms of like, but which order to do first, second, or third. Well, that kind of, to me, is kind of dictated just by the order that's presented on the screen. Is there any of this that might affect what comes after? Not really, because if these constraints and relationships haven't already been established, it really, not really harming anything, just a matter of whether it's lacking or not. But since we're forming the connections, it isn't really going to hurt a darn thing. So let's do the first one here, and we are going to work on the book date column. So for that one, I did this command. Alright, so you can see what we're trying to do here. We're just adding a constraint, giving it a name. Once again, we're pulling a system timestamp, and for which field for book date. Would that satisfy what's being asked for here for a default value? It sure would. So if the system timestamps it, we're good. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to work on the rental. Well, the way that I have it here is the expiration date is the next one that I worked on. So with that one, we were looking at this snippet of information, and it says system date plus 2 days. Now, I don't know if you guys remember the old Blockbuster days, like you'd walk in there, find something, and then you get a few days to watch it. Times have really changed quite a bit. That was quite a whole experience in itself, really. Now, take a look here at the syntax, and I think this is kind of fascinating, the way that this is put together. And that is, we still have the timestamp in there, and really what we're doing is we're adding 2 days by virtue of this other built-in command, which automatically does that function, and that should have been in your readings in terms of how that works. And whenever you're working with any of these pre-built functions, and there's many of them, you often have to get to the point where you're looking up what they actually do. So obviously day is a preset in the system. 2 is how many we're adding to it, and obviously this was built for situations just like this. So let's say like you were checking out a book from the library or whatever, maybe a bill might be set for 30 days or 60 days or something like that. Right, so that's how we would get this one. Next one, I'm going to start setting up these foreign keys. The first one will be based on member ID, and in this case member ID is going to reference the member ID and the member next to it. Next thing that we're going to do is the foreign key for which copy we're pulling out. So with a video store, sometimes if it's a popular title, they'll have multiple copies, and each one will have its own unique ID, and then the title that goes with it. And then finally, we're going to do the foreign key
Mm-hmm.
for title ID. Alright, and you see how this one works. And this one, the foreign keys I think are pretty straight ahead once you get the feel of them. And you're really just attaching from corresponding fields from table to table, and then in this case the reference thing is just pulling that extra little bit of information over. Let's go ahead and execute these, and it says they all completed successfully. So if we're now looking at the rental table, you should start to see the constraints that we put in and then the keys. Right, so that looks like it worked just fine. And then let's copy all of that code into the document. Just like that. A few more to get some practice here. This one looks like we have 2 foreign keys that we're pulling in. And let's start first with, okay, so this is under the table reservation. So we think about how we might name that. And we're going to be doing basically the same process that we were just doing. So this is not really anything new here. So let's just paste this whole thing in there. So I have in my buffer here. You guys ever hear that term anymore, buffer? So we used to call it when we would copy paste, that's where the stuff sits while you wait. Alright. Probably the trickiest part is naming it. I think it's a pretty straight ahead alteration. The next one is very, very similar. And I think that, whenever you're naming these things, my strong recommendation is think about how you're naming it and how it links things together and what it really means. It's okay to be verbose. I know in the old days we would kind of, frown upon that a little bit, but these days it's considered good practice. All right, once again, it says that the constraints were added. We can always go in there and take a look, make sure the constraints, actually we didn't add any constraints, did we? Just the foreign keys are present, and those are already good. So let's paste those into the document. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right. Now, these next steps are kind of interesting because it's asking us to insert information into the member table, and then it's asking us, were there errors, and if there were, why were there errors, and explain why it didn't work. All right. So to me, this looks pretty straight ahead. Without going in and actually examining the table, you're not often remembering exactly what is there, but it doesn't hurt to look either. So the one thing that you could do if you want to anticipate an error is you can see are all these fields here. So member ID, last, first, address, blah, blah, blah. That looks like it's all here. So we should be okay if we just write a pretty simple insert command. So let's drop this in. Here's the command. You can see with the member ID, we're just kind of arbitrarily coming up with a value. And would you anticipate an error with this? And if we were in class, I'd kind of quiz you guys on this stuff. But this looks pretty straight ahead to me. I don't know why it would generate an error, so I would anticipate you guys would say no. But it does not like what I'm trying to do here for time, obviously. And anybody have any? Should I just run it again and see if it works? And that's the thing that happens with with these languages sometimes is exactly that. You get into that particular thing. I'm concerned right now that it's not really using the video database. Let's do this. Yeah, so it says failed when converting date and or time from character string. So what error are we really, what's the problem here? Well, the simple answer is that the way that the date ends up in the system, right, the way that it ends up in the system isn't necessarily as plain text the way that we have typed it. That's really kind of the catch here. So I used, this command, and then if you want to explain about the error, what I would recommend is that you say something like date in wrong format or something like that. Because even though it'll print as text, it isn't actually text. So there's some issue with that. So there is a, you wouldn't anticipate an error, but here we are getting exactly that. All right. Next one, and I'm going to kind of accelerate through these a little bit here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste in the commands for doing these and try to execute them. And I know this one's not going to work either, I think, if I have it set up the same way. Why would you think that this one wouldn't work? It might be very much for the same reason. Let's go ahead and see if it executes. Well, this one executed. All right, so why the one wouldn't take it and why the other would? Maybe we need to think about that join date and why it wasn't working. And could it be because some of the constraints that we put in? So the system date constraint. So if I was running that previous command and that constraint did what? It pulled today's date, but here I am trying to type it in. There's your answer, folks. This one worked just fine because the creation date of a movie isn't going to be automatically timestamped because I just typed it in. That's not when it was created. That's when I entered the record. So in that table, it's okay for you to drop the value in directly. All right, and that's why that one worked just fine. Let's paste that back into the document. And then, if you want, you'd say no errors. Okay, insert another movie title into the title table. And here we have the movie Gremlins that we're going to be throwing in. Somebody must have been like a Steven Spielberg fan or something that put this together. And for this one, pulling right from that table of information, just goes right into title, very similar to what we just did. And it says the insert statement conflicted with the check constraint. Check rating. The conflict occurred in the statement has been terminated. So notice that it's looking here at the rating field. So it's looking at these in order as you're passing them into the table. So it's trying to put them in to the title table in the same order that the columns appear here. The other thing that we have in place is the constraint that checks the ratings to make sure that the ratings that we're putting in match something that's in the table. There's no such thing as an NC12. So if you, as a good data entry person, I guess, we're doing this and you did exactly what the information said, and you can say rating didn't work, doesn't exist, or something like that. Can you run it? Sure. You just fix that, choose a rating that's valid, and then the thing will run. Next one that we have is number 9 here. Same type of thing. So in this case, here's the command that you convert from what is provided. Okay, and we're going to insert this into rental, and then let's be anticipatory this time and take a look at like what we did to the rental table. And with the rental table, we have these columns here that we're working with. So book date, member ID, copy ID, return date, expected return date, and the title. And if I start looking here at this, okay, book date, member ID, copy ID, expected return date, or actual return date, and expected return date. And then finally, the title ID. So that's the ID number for the title. Let's go ahead and run this and see if anything will work here. So they have a pretty verbose, conflict occurred in the member ID column. So what they're telling us is that the member ID is not jiving with the member that's in the column that's already listed. So it's not finding it, and basically what it's saying is the value that we're trying to match it to doesn't exist. And so in that case, you have to get that member number to match up with somebody who's actually a member. So I can't say that your movie's got to be back on Wednesday if you're not even a valid member to work with here. So I'm going to go ahead then and paste this in to the document, and I'm just going to say error linking to member ID. And you could say needs a valid one. Alright. Next one, we're going into title copy table. And this is a pretty simple little addition. And if you run this one, it just says title copy. Once again, really what they're trying to get you to do, and if you're not like picking up on this, is really to kind of look at your tables as you write these statements and make predictions about what's going to work or not, or how you're going to write these. The columns that we have are pretty simplistic. As long as everything is okay, it should be fine. Do we have any constraints? We have to check the status, and really all we're looking for is availability or not. So let's see if this one works. And this one worked just fine. So I would copy this. I didn't anticipate any problems, and I didn't see any problems. It's a simple command, and then you would say no errors. And some people will write that part down here. That's fine too. Doesn't really matter too much. All right. This one's kind of interesting. It says, with number 11, repeat step 9 above. So step 9 was to run the command, right? So let's run it again. All right, so this time we got an error because we already have that primary key, so we can't insert a duplicate. And then you would say, no duplicates or something like that. And actually, this answer.
This didn't happen.
Yeah, right. All right. It says the next two steps, 12 and 13, require that step 9 above was successful, and if it was not successful, make sure you go back and fix it before you continue. All right, so we didn't have any problems. We did have a problem
Mm-hmm.
Oh, oh, I see. It says, um, but number 9, we did have a problem. So, how would we make this command actually work? So, how could we fix that command to make it work? Well, what was the error that we actually had? We couldn't link. Well, it wasn't the title ID. It was the member ID, right? And what we could do is we could just write a really quick little select star from member, and really just run a simple query like that and see who's actually. We don't have any members, right? That's the that's the problem. So how would we make it valid? Then we would have to add the member. All right, so let's really quickly write a statement here that would allow us to do exactly that. So see if you guys can help me build this. What do I put next?
You're gonna go in order.
Sure.
And you don't. If you are, then you just put values
Okay.
and parentheses, and then the values you want to throw in there.
Right. And what was the member ID number they were throwing at us? 123. So let's put that one in for sure. And then maybe like Smith, Jane, Elm Street, let's say Kenosha, and what's our last field? Join date. Oh, yeah, so what do I do with that? Do you just leave it blank?
You leave it null so that it automatically populates.
Say again, Brenda?
You just leave it as null so that it automatically populates.
Right. Let's run it like this. Yeah. But the columns don't work. So how do I do null then? Do you think that'll work? All right. So that's one way to do it. Now we can go back and do our simple select statement. And let's run that. So now we're good. Now the strange thing is if we go back, of course now, and we did run this commands, because that was one of the stipulations, right? That command's got to work to do the other steps. So now that we fixed it, it'll work. So you see that part I guess is a little bit tricky, but you know, my hopes were that we would do it like this, work through it together, so you guys would see it.
So I have a question about the dates. It looks like it put in, you know, January 1st of the turn of this last century. It doesn't use today's date?
Yeah, it should use today's date. It didn't. You know, Brenda, I didn't even pay attention.
When you did, well, unless I saw it.
One way we can see it is like this. Yeah, they joined a really long time ago.
Weird.
All right. That is weird. And you know what? Depending on yeah. Okay. So what I'm trying to it should have pulled in the right date. I'm a little perplexed as to why it didn't, honestly, because we have the system date constraint in there, and I'm wondering if it's actually linking correctly. Yeah, and I think that's pretty funny. It's funny that it's 1900 actually, and I think that's a byproduct of the whole Y2K thing. But there was a time in the past where like the first earliest computer date you could get on a computer was 1970, because really kind of functionally before that, regular people didn't really use computers. They just weren't available. Why that's not populating with today's date, I guess we'll have to look that up. I'm not super concerned with that, obviously. Ideally, it would be today's date, so I'm a little perplexed as to why it's doing that. So I'd have to go back and check that constraint. Kind of don't want to waste the time on it right now.
No problem.
But boy, that video is very late. And I would have to go back and check it. Now, hopefully, what we're doing that doesn't affect too much of this, but it shouldn't. All right, let's move on to this next little set of commands. So for number 12, it says delete the same data you just inserted in step 10 above. Now, in step 10, we did this and it worked just fine, right? So if we want to delete that information, so this is kind of a copy of that, the delete command, it should look like this. All right, and really, because of all the stuff that we've got in there, that's all it should take to remove it. Let's make sure it does. Okay, I'm not trusting that that's correct, but apparently it is. All right, it says the delete statement conflicted with the reference constraint foreign key copy ID. The conflict occurred in the database video rental copy ID. So if I look at the rental table, then we have this foreign key copy ID where we're looking for this particular item. Where would we find it? Well, it would normally be constraint. So we would say, we'd put in our command error. You can just say foreign key constraints kept it from working. That would be adequate. All right. With step number 13, it says show the steps that must be taken in order to successfully delete the data in step 12. All right, so it actually is going to require 2 steps, and one of the problems that we have is the fact that when we go to this title copy table, really all that it's doing is it's looking at the copy ID and the title ID. So conceptually, we have more than one copy of a video. Each one of those is unique, but in order for me to remove that movie from the list of available movies altogether, and that's really what's being asked of us, it's going to require 2 steps. So the first step is actually to remove it from the rental table. So just remove the title altogether. So the first command would be this, and then the second step, and what I would do is I would run this first. All right, and then maybe copy the command over while we're in the process, I suppose. Then we can go ahead and do the command we were trying to do. Yeah, that wasn't, I didn't paste it in here so I get the color coding. And execute that. Now we can run that command and it should work just fine, and you shouldn't get any errors. Alright, so you can paste that in, and then that should be it for that. The next thing that you'll want to do is create all these relationships, and I'm thinking that what might be most efficient here, I think you guys are pretty aware of how to do this particular step, but what we're looking to do is to get your diagram from SQL Server that hopefully matches this. Now you might not have that same type of layout, and you can see this example here is not the layout that you'll get for these tables. And if you guys remember how to do that, does anybody remember how to do that? How do we get the ERD document out of our database? Anybody want to guide me?
If you go to the down one, I can't.
Okay.
Yeah, the database diagrams right below where you're at.
I don't see diagrams.
This
your
one.
Your box is in the way. Get that box out of there. Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
And if you actually click or right click on database diagrams and new,
May as well do all of them, right?
select.
Right.
Yeah, it's a pretty automatic process, and then it's more a matter of like arranging them than anything else. So are you guys all comfortable doing that?
I am.
Okay. All right, let's call this one done. What I'd like to do right now is I'm going to pause the video. And what I think I'm going to do, to me what makes the most sense is I'm going to break these up into separate videos. So I'm going to end this video here, and then let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll start up again on the next exercise. Sound good?
Right.
All right. So I'm going to mute my mic and camera. I'm just going to step away to refresh my coffee here.